What is up, everybody? This is your boy Jay Reed, and I'm coming at you with another episode of Sports Blitz Media. Now, today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing combat sports journalist Kevin Iole. Now, Kevin has been around combat sports for quite some time. As in 1999, won Outstanding Journalist by the Nevada Press. 2007, won the Nat Fleischer Award for Excellence in Boxing Journalism, and in 2014 was inducted into the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame. Now, for those of you who enjoy combat sports and watch combat sports from boxing to MMA, Kevin is always at these events covering the fighters, interviewing them, asking them questions during their big press conferences. And he's someone that I'm here to pick his brain a little bit, just to get a little bit more insight on him, how he got involved with, combat sports journalism, and kind of where he got his start. And so I hope you guys enjoy this pod. This is going to be a good one.
Me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Well, first off, Kevin, I just want to say thank you for joining the podcast today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm honestly a huge fan. I'm a huge MMA fan and someone who watches the press conferences all the time. I always see you asking some of the best questions up there, to the fighters and things like that. And I've kind of read your bio on your website and learned actually a lot of new things about you, especially when it comes to the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame. I thought that was actually really impressive and things like that. So wanted to kind of just talk to you about how you, right, look, I see it all. Look, and I mean, obviously that was just one of the accolades you have. Obviously you had a long list. You've been around this sport and boxing and MMA for a very long time. And someone like me who is just getting kind of into the, sports journalism space wanted to kind of pick the brains of someone who's been around it and has succeeded, like yourself.
Well, happy to help. Yeah, no. Let's get it rolling.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. So really the first question is where did your love for combat sports? How did that start?
Muhammad Ali, very easy. I was a kid and my dad fought in the Army. My dad was a boxing fan, and so I followed boxing because he followed boxing. And when I saw Muhammad Ali, I was just blown away, right? I was a little kid, but I was into boxing forever because of him. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s as a huge Muhammad Ali fan. And I have on my Twitter bio, Muhammad Ali is my idol. And he was my idol from as long as I can remember back. I was an Ali fan. And so that's where it really developed. And, I started out as a boxing fan. Of course, back in those days, there was no MMA, right? But I got into MMA as time went on. And I love MMA quite a bit now, too. Like, I'm working for myself. And, today I did 5 stories, right? I did some boxing stories. I did some MMA stories. And it's almost like I'm not working, because I just love what I'm doing. And, when I was working for somebody else, there would be days like, maybe I don't want to do this or whatever, right? But now that I'm working for myself, I only have myself to blame for good or bad what happens, and I can't blame it on anybody else. And I do what I love, right? I'm writing about fights and I'm writing about the stories that I want to write about. Nobody's ordering me to do it. And so it's a blast.
Right. And then even in you saying that, I read that you worked for Yahoo Sports for quite some time. And I guess that's what you mean by when someone kind of telling you what to write, what you can write, and things that you can cover and things like that.
Well, Yahoo Sports was great. Like I was there almost 17 years. And I've had a full-time job. I'm 64 right now. And I've had a full-time job since I was 19. So for 45 years, I've had a full-time job in journalism. I guess if we still consider what I'm doing now a full-time job, right? But I'm hoping it is. And
you've got to the pivotal. That's what you are where everyone wants to be, having a full-time job that you genuinely love to do.
Yeah. So that, and so, in any event, I mean, but, Yahoo was a company just like any other company, and they had things that worked for them and things that didn't. So I'm able to do things now. There was a lot of stuff that they allowed me to do that I would have never gotten able to do. So I'm grateful, and I love all my, former colleagues that I work with, we've stayed in touch. We're good friends. But, they were not a combat sports site. They were a site that had combat sports, but they were a general sports audience. So there were stories that I can write at my own site that is directed toward the hardcore combat sports fan that would not work for Yahoo. And so that, that's what I mean. And I'm making those decisions, right? Sometimes before I would say, hey, I want to write about so-and-so, and yeah, maybe the audience isn't going to be there for that one. Now it's on me. And I like that.
Right. Yeah, you get to control your own narrative. You can control, what, like you said, what you want to write about and things like that. And so going back to you said your love for sports became from Muhammad Ali. What pivotal moment, like what moment had you gravitate? What did he do that really got you besides fighting? Obviously, he was a great spokesman when it came to selling fights, but what pivotal moment was like, man, this guy, I want to be able to, do this.
I think a lot of people your age don't realize how divided or how opposed the people in the country were to the Vietnam War in the 1960s, right? Now, at the beginning of the 60s, he won the Olympic gold medal in 1960, and maybe up until he beat Sonny Liston, the support, our involvement in the war wasn't as big as it would become. And I think people didn't really think about it all that much. And the world was a different place, right? The media wasn't, we didn't have, we couldn't go to the computer and log on and see, 10,000 people were killed in Vietnam today, right? You didn't have that immediacy. So you had to wait for the 6 o'clock news or the next day you had to wait for the newspaper to come out. You didn't have that immediacy that we have now. So the opposition to the war wasn't there. But when Ali got drafted into the service in 1967 and he refused to report, he started talking about, why he was opposed to the war. And that started bringing, a lot of attention to it. And people said, yeah, this is, and so he led, this was, I thank God for the people who sacrificed their lives and for the people who served our country in that war. But it was an unjust war. That was not a war that we should have been involved in. And Ali led that. And I just, as a young boy, like not really knowing what's going on, but he stood up for what he believed in, right? And that to me really grabbed me. Like, you know what? This is the most famous guy in the world. And he is standing up to for what he believes in, even at the cost of his job, his livelihood. And
Right.
boxing, again, this is something that people who were your age won't recognize. Boxing was huge in the 60s, much bigger than it is now. And probably up through 1960, boxing was number 2 sport in the country, maybe number 3. It used to always be baseball, horse racing, boxing in some order. Those were the 3 big sports. The late 1950s, the NFL started to grow, and boxing started to wane a little bit. But still, boxing was big in the 60s with Ali there, and he was willing to give up the top prize and arguably the top sport. And that really spoke to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously watching the Ali movie, you kind of get a general idea of how everything was back then. And he is obviously sports icon when it comes to combat sports. Everyone knows Muhammad Ali, and if you don't, then go read a book. But yeah, so and again, like you said, my generation, we didn't the boxing we get today is nothing like it was back then. And only movies can kind of show us and do justice. But I'm sure between Ali and Liston and George Foreman and Ali, those were probably some of the greatest moments in combat sports that it's probably hard to compete with today.
Well, I mean, I give credit where credit is due, and I think we have a lot of good athletes in the fight game now, and a lot of good things are happening. What they don't have is the experience. The guys at that level, back in the day, they used to fight a lot more often. Like, Sugar Ray Robinson, who I think is the greatest fighter who ever lived, greatest boxer who ever lived. Robinson fought Jake LaMotta twice in 3 weeks, right? Imagine now, we have, Mayweather Pacquiao took 6 years to get the fight made, right?
Right.
And all the consternation we went through. And Jake LaMotta and Sugar Ray Robinson fought twice in 3 weeks. Just crazy, what
Wow.
used to happen. But they would fight a lot, and so they were more experienced. But I think boxing today. I don't want to overstate this, but I think boxing today gets a bad rap. There's a lot of good fighters, and there's a lot of talent in the sport. Maybe not the experience that that it was, but things grow. And like if you look in all the sports that are measurables, right? So running 100 meters, how high you can jump, how much weight you can lift, all the records go up like this. So it stands to reason, why wouldn't boxers be better than they were then, because they have access to better training methods. They have access to video. Imagine, Sugar Ray Robinson could have went frame by frame on a video and broken down,
Really
his
watching
fight,
film.
how much better he might have been, right? But he couldn't do that. So, I think that there's pros and cons to both, but I think we're getting a lot of really good athletes in the sport. And if they just would promote, the biggest problem is boxing kills itself. There's a lot of promotional issues and a lot of management issues that really hurts boxing itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm a big boxing fan. Obviously, my love for combat sports came from mixed martial arts,
Right.
watching the Chuck Liddells, the Rich Franklins, those guys just, go to battle back in the day. But the new generation of boxers, the Ryan Garcias, the Devin Haney's, the Tanks, I feel like, especially with the social media platforms they have, allows them to promote these fights, a lot more. And I feel like all they have to do is just continue fighting. I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to boxing is, like you said, Mayweather, Pacquiao, 6 years. It takes these guys forever to step into the ring to put on these big performances. That's why Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford was so exciting, because you finally got to see two top tier boxers step in the ring and put on a performance.
Two unbeaten champions who had, kind of obviously separated themselves. They were both in the top 10 pound for pound. I think both were in the top 5 pound for pound, going into that fight. And so, that's awesome when you can have that, right? When you can have two guys like that. But the problem, I think, in boxing today relative to the UFC, if you look at the UFC or look at MMA in general, right? The fighters themselves want to fight the best fights, and they want to fight, if you're ranked number 10, you want to fight 9, and if you're ranked number 7, you want to fight 6, and they call out those guys. And in boxing, they want to win one fight against a semi-recognizable name, and they want to fight for the title already, and you don't get that. So build yourself, fight those fights on the way up. And that's why the UFC has become so popular. They do a great job promoting, and there's a lot of other things that go into it. But at their core, they make the fights that the fans want to see on it. UFC's been in existence for 30 years, right? So this is year 31 starting now. You can name a couple fights that we wanted to see that we didn't see in the UFC over 30 years. But in boxing, you can name that all the time, right? We can't see this, we can't see that. But mostly in the UFC, all of the fights that we wanted to see got made. And if you start with that principle and you say, fight tough fights, and if you lose, we don't care. We want to see you, as long as you fight hard and you try and you give a good effort. Hey, when you fight the best fighters in the world, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. That's what we want to see. I think that's where boxing has to come back at, and that's what MMA has to continue to keep doing.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%, because, I mean, Dana and the boys, they do a great job of putting, like you said, putting on these fights, and it has us keep coming back for more. Even if when they do, 2 or 3 or even 4 in Figueiredo Moreno's case, it's still exciting, because you're still on the edge of your seat, like, ooh, what's going to happen this time? Because you never know in a sport like that.
So in other words, if you go to a club show, you don't know who the fighters are. They're not very good. You may like it, you may not, right? But chances are there's nothing at stake. But when you watch a UFC fight, there's always something at stake, because they pay attention to the rankings. And, even in some cases where the UFC doesn't like where guys got ranked, they're ranked by certain media. And as a result of that, the fights carry significance. Hey, this is 2 versus 3. Is this person is the winner of this fight going to be able to be, fighting for the title in his next fight or her next fight? And that, there's always significance to those fights. And as long as you make meaningful fights that carry significance, on some level, then it's going to be, the sport is going to thrive.
Right. And since we're on the topic of UFC, where did you begin when it came to UFC and just mixed martial arts in general?
Well, when the UFC came in 1993, I remember watching it, because it was billed as, Campbell McLaren, who now runs the Combate Global organization, was doing marketing for the UFC at the time. 2 men enter, 1 man leaves, and it was billed basically like a fight to the death, right? Nobody knew, there was not a lot of people at the time who knew what jiu-jitsu was, including me, right?
Right.
I certainly did not know that. And so I watched the first couple of UFCs and I enjoyed it, even though like I didn't totally understand it, but it was fun. But then I fell away from UFC. I think it was UFC 5 or 6. They had Emmanuel Yarbrough, who was 600 pounds. He fought Keith Hackney, who was 190. I'm like, what is this? Right? To me, that was pro wrestling. And so I fell away from it. And so I didn't see it for a while. And then all of a sudden, Mark Ratner, who was at the time, he was the executive director of the Nevada Athletic Commission. And I had a good relationship with him. He's now working for the UFC, but he said, you know what, you better pay attention to this mixed martial arts because we are going to, and I was at a newspaper in Las Vegas at the time. He said, we are going to ratify it and we're going to have MMA fights coming here. So you might want to get yourself up on the sport. And that's how I got into it. Right. And I remember, when Dana White first bought the UFC. So I had known Dana from boxing. Like I knew Dana long before he was in UFC. People don't understand that we had a relationship that predates UFC. But anyways, his office at the time when they bought the UFC was tiny. I mean, it was smaller than this room I'm sitting in now talking to you. And they called it the map room. And there was stuff all over the place. And so we are literally on the floor grappling in his office as he's trying to show me like what grappling is and sort of, transitions and moves that guys would make. And so that was something that we did. It was very funny.
Yeah, it was probably a trip, going from just strictly standing up boxing gloves to these 4-ounce gloves, or even in the beginning, no gloves. And like you said, that is one of the biggest viral clips when it comes to MMA. It was a 600-pound man versus, roughly 170-pound man. And that's what got my attention. I was like, what? This is interesting. And obviously, as a young boy, like I said, I wasn't able to watch the Muhammad Ali's and things like that. And so when it came to combat sports, I'm looking at the Rampage Jacksons, because even Pride was a little bit out of my realm. And so I just caught the early development really of UFC when, Rampage, Chuck, Rich, and all those other guys. And so that's kind of how I got my start. I remember to this day being out at a birthday party and probably was around 10, 11 years old, but just really started getting introduced to MMA and just watching Rampage Jackson knock out Chuck Liddell. It was just the craziest thing, but the coolest thing ever,
That was crazy.
Yes,
I'll never forget that fight.
Yeah. And like I said, I was so young, but just like I said, watching it. And then me and all my buddies, we would have pretty much big UFC watch parties, and like I said, remember watching Rich Franklin knee Chuck Liddell to death, and then just all these historic fighters. And now you come to today's day and age to where I feel like it's a lot more technical than it was back then.
Oh yeah.
You had a lot of brawlers. It was a big brawl pretty much. And now you have these guys like the Ilya Toporias and the Volkanovskis who are super technical and super obviously athletic and things like that, but their mentality is a lot different, in my opinion, as well.
Yeah, I think the difference now is the fact that a lot, not all of them, but a lot of the kids grow up training MMA, right? They don't, before it was, okay, you were a boxer and then you had to learn the other stuff, or you were a wrestler and you had to learn the other stuff. And, and that's still the case to a little bit of a degree. The more you're getting kids coming into the sport who trained as MMA fighters from the beginning. And it's natural to go from stand up to grappling to, to all these different elements that you have to defend in an MMA fight. And I think that's what makes it a lot of fun, because now they are really much better versed, and guys don't have these glaring weaknesses like they used to have. Before, you could say, well, this guy does not do, jujitsu and he's fighting a jujitsu guy, so we kind of know what's going to happen, right? Now you don't really, you might say, hey, Habib has great jujitsu, but can he match up with blah, blah, blah? And I think that's, the fact that now everybody has that background and they've trained in MMA a long time, when they get into the sport, it makes it so appealing.
Right. Yeah, big time. And, like you said, back then you either had a grappler or you had a striker, and you kind of knew what you were getting when it came to that. The grappler couldn't throw a jab to save his life, and the striker couldn't do anything on the ground. And now you have such a verse game. cool to see. So, and so I kind of want to talk about, obviously some past events in the UFC. We could talk a little bit about Volkanovski, Topuria, and I also want to talk about upcoming events between PFL Bellator, which is this weekend, and also we have a UFC card, but then UFC 300. So we'll start off with, you were at UFC 298. Tell us about your experience there, and the environment, the atmosphere, and how crazy it was to watch Topuria knock out Volkanovski.
Yeah, the crowd was really into it. I mean, it was a tremendous crowd. The weigh-in, they were totally engaged in it, and the fight, it was off the hook, loud, energetic, and I say it's kind of like that, that high-level fight night feel that you get, right? That you got when it was Tyson versus Holyfield back in the day, and that you get now on only the biggest fights. I mean, that's how that fight felt. When Miranda Maverick and Andrea Lee came walking out for that first fight of the night, there was a palpable energy in the arena, right? I mean, it was really, you could feel it, and it stayed the whole night. And, but yeah, Volkanovski, you're talking about one of the greatest fighters in the history of this sport, and he's going up against a guy who had a great record, and we knew that he could punch. We knew that Ilya could wrestle. We knew he had technical boxing, but could he deal with a guy at the level that Volkanovski was? He proved he could, right? But that was there was like a gasp when Volkanovski got knocked out. Like people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this." But yeah, that was really something to see.
Yeah, it's crazy how these fighters, such as Volk, have these historic runs, and then it kind of just comes to a halt, and everything like it just goes silent, almost like, well, what next? And obviously, Ilya is a great fighter. He'll be a great champion. Do you think Volk deserves another opportunity? I mean, obviously he did great, but him, obviously Ilya put out, I want to say today, that he plans on defending his belt and then moving up to try to fight Islam, and probably going after the money fights, which
Well,
I feel like
I don't like that fight, him going up. That's the thing I don't like right away.
right. Yeah, obviously continue building your resume. I feel like some people forget that, what trying to be great. They want to just chase the money, get the money as quick as they can. They forget about the legacy that they're also building.
Yeah, when they say, and you use the phrase a lot of fighters use, I want to chase the money. And yes, you're in this to make money. There's no doubt, but you're chasing short-term money and you're giving up long-term money. Do what Volk did. Like, look at Volk, who he fought on the way up, and then when he got his title shot, he fights Max Holloway, who at the time was considered the greatest featherweight champion of all time. He fights Max Holloway not once, not twice, but 3 times, right? So you look at his resume and the people he's beaten, Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, Max Holloway 3 times. I mean, just go on down the line. Jose Aldo, right? I mean, he has that long list of big names on his resume, and that made him greater than what he would have otherwise been because of who he beat. And I think Islam needs to keep that in mind. Now, you can argue to me, and I might accept it, that Volk, he's got knocked out in back-to-back fights, doesn't deserve the next shot. I mean, I'm not sure what I think on that yet, to be honest with you. I could be swayed, but Volk has to be in that picture. And I think Ilya either needs to fight some combination of the Ortega Rodriguez winner from Saturday, Volk, or Holloway again. Holloway's fighting at UFC 300 against Justin Gaethje, assuming he's not the BMF champion and doesn't want to stay at 155 where that fight's being fought. I think he has to be in the consideration for another championship opportunity.
Yeah, Max was looking relatively thick at his press conference. I was like, okay, he put on some weight, and I thought he should have did that the first time against Dustin Poirier, because obviously he has all the skill. But in that fight, Dustin just had more pop, more power, and it was obviously, everyone can see it. And so I'm really excited to see what Max does against Justin Gaethje. That's going to be a phenomenal fight.
Oh,
I mean, even that whole UFC 300 card is going to be absolutely ridiculous, and I'm excited for it. What do you think about Jamal Hill, Alex Pereira headlining?
I did a video today that I haven't posted yet, but I'm like going, am I nuts? But I'm liking UFC 300. and I hear these morons, and I'm going to call them morons because
Yeah.
they're complaining about you. So just having Justin Gaethje and Holloway on there, you're going to go, okay, this is worth it. But I look, and I disagree with Dana, on where I think his comment was any one of these fights could headline a fight night or a pay-per-view card. The Jessica Andrade fight, I'm not so, it's a decent fight, but it's not a great fight. And there, what's his name, Bo Nickel against Cody Brundage. I don't think right now that's a headline fight.
Right.
But I think when you look at the depth on this card, first fight of the night, Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt, and you go up and you see how many good fights all the way throughout, I think this is arguably the greatest card in UFC history. Now, I think what ended up happening here was the UFC outsmarted itself in a way. They did a great job because instead of letting the media release all these fights, they decided, hey, we're going to get a tremendous amount of traffic on our social media. And what does that traffic mean? Money, right? So let's announce it ourselves. And so they started doing that, and they kept all the announcements in-house, right? And they were really telling everybody, don't tell anybody what you're doing. Keep this in-house. So now they were announcing everything. But every time Dana would do a video and they were adding a fight, he kept upping the ante, and this is going to be the greatest fight card ever. And so people were like, what are they doing? And they had all these crazy ideas. Ronda Rousey was coming back, and Brock Lesnar was coming back, and GSP was coming back, and, and none of that was true. But I think if you look at it and you go, Pereira versus Hill in the main event, the champion versus the former champion who never lost in the ring, both knockout punchers, both guys that, can go at any moment. I mean, so to me, that's a really fun main event. Zhang Weili and Zhao Nan, I think that's a Zhang Weili fight to lose right there. I like her in that fight, and I think she's the better fighter. But I think you're going to see a performance by her where you're going to go, whoa, and she's going to show. Then you're going to have the BMF title fight. Then you're going to have Charles Oliveira against Sarukian. I mean, Yuri Prohaska against Rakic should be a really fun slugfest, right? And I'm going, on my video, I'm saying, where are these people coming up with this garbage and saying it's a bad fight card? I mean, and I say this in all due respect to Bellator and the PFL, right? People were excited about that fight card because it came out of nowhere. There wasn't a buildup of who would be on, and they're going, oh, and it is a fun card, right? But is Ryan Bader and Renan Ferreira a better fight than Alex Pereira and Jamal Hill?
Right, not at all.
And do they have any fight on that card? Thiago Santos and Yoel Romero, can that compare to Holloway and Gaethje? And when you start looking at it that way, I'm not dogging that card because I think that's a fun card and I'll be looking forward to watching that. But the point I'm making is I think the UFC got expectations out of whack of what might happen because of how Dana on each individual fight that he was releasing, he would just, it's going to be the greatest card ever. And I think people thought it was going to be, Jesus coming down from heaven to fight somebody, right? I think that's really what they thought might happen.
Right. And I still think it's going to be, a great card. I feel like people are underestimating Jamal Hill's star power. I feel like Jamal Hill is one hell of a fighter. And obviously he hasn't fought in a while because of the Achilles injury, but even his performance, I don't care what people say about Glover. Glover is a phenomenal fighter. He's been around the block. He's fought the best of the best, and he was someone who was chasing a championship. And even though it was his belt to lose, Jamal Hill's a phenomenal fighter. And I personally, I like Jamal Hill in the fight. And I know a lot of people are Alex Pereira. I think Jamal Hill has a big. I see Jamal Hill winning that fight just because obviously weight cutting may have a big factor to do with Alex's loss. Maybe I feel like the way Izzy gave him everything he got with that punch. I feel like Hill is bigger, stronger than Izzy. Can just as good as a striker, and he's only had one mishap when it came to getting his chin touched up a little bit. But I like Jamal Hill in that fight.
The thing that makes it a fun fight is you can make an argument for both guys, right? And so that's what to me makes it an entertaining bout, because you don't really know. Like what you said is 100% accurate. Hey, look, Pereira got knocked out by a middleweight, and a middleweight who didn't show a lot of pop when he went to light heavyweight to fight Jan Blachowicz, right? Israel didn't look like this big knockout puncher at that weight class. He's clearly a middleweight, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's his weight class. Right. He's been dominant in it, but Jamal Hill is a bigger, stronger, puncher, right? And Jamal Hill hitting you on the chin is different than Israel Adesanya hitting you on the chin. But on the other hand, you say, well, Pereira is now 20 pounds bigger, and that extra weight is going to make him sturdier. And so, you and look at he's done, and look at who he's beaten in his short, time in MMA. Right. Blows out Prohaska in the last title fight. I mean, so that's the fun thing about it, right? You just don't know. You can argue on both sides, and we're not going to know until they ring the bell and get in there and start throwing. But it's gonna be a fun fight. And to me, I think that fight is one that the public hasn't warmed up to yet. But I think when they see it, they're going to be going, "Oh my Lord, this was something."
Right, and hopefully it goes more than a round. I want to see both of these guys, really out there, putting on performance, because usually with guys like that, this fight, be ready, folks. Be on the edge of your seat, because it may not last long.
When you're wearing 4-ounce gloves, that's the problem. You get the what is the great thing about, people a lot of times will ask me, what do you like better, boxing or MMA? And I honestly, I'm not copying out. I do like them both the same. I always say the matchup, right? Whatever the better matchup is at a given period of time is what I like better. But if I'm going to say something is better about boxing than MMA, it is this: when they have a great fight and it goes 12 rounds, right? We get that 36-minute fight where, man, you get to see that action going and going and going. In an MMA fight, maximum 25 minutes, number one. And then a lot of times, because they're wearing those 4-ounce gloves, as opposed to the 8 or 10-ounce gloves in boxing, you get cracked with one of those and good night, Irene. And the fight doesn't, so you don't get the length that you do in a boxing match.
Right. No, 100%, 100%. And so, in all your years of covering sports combat sports, what would you say your favorite event has been?
Event? Ooh, that's an interesting one.
So, either boxing or MMA.
UFC 100 was pretty amazing, right? I mean, look at all the great matches that were on that card. And that was kind of like the first time you realized, hey, this sport is really going to grow into something, right? As it was coming up, obviously it was widening and getting bigger. But UFC 100 was a signal that, hey, this sport is really going to take off. And so I would say, that particular fight, I remember covering, and I had this argument a little bit with Dana White. I interviewed him before UFC 298, and he said, we're going to have 11 to 13 champions, current or former champions, on UFC 300 card. And I mentioned just casually, I said, well, that's what Don King used to do back in the day. And Dana got, oh no, well, he's never had that many. So I went and looked, because I knew he did. I was at these fight cards, right? And in the second fight I looked at, trying to count the number of current or former champs on a card, was a fight in March of '96 at the MGM in Las Vegas, where there was 11 former boxing current or former boxing world champions on that card. So I've been blessed. I've seen a lot of great events, right? And then I saw Corrales Castillo fight, and live, and so many others. So, but I think from a standpoint of just UFC 100 kind of opened the eyes to, we are sitting on something here that's going to explode and be so huge.
Yeah. And look where you are, almost at UFC 300 now. And obviously this sport has taken off and leads, obviously leads combat sports right now.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, UFC clearly is the biggest combat sport in the world, right? I mean, MMA is the biggest combat sport in the world, and UFC is the biggest clearly in MMA.
Right. Agreed. And interesting, and even going back to the PFL Bellator, you kind of shined a little bit of light on me in looking at that card, because obviously when you see that card, you're sitting there like, Ryan Bader, you've been around the block a little bit. You're fighting is almost 6'10". The man is huge, and you're just watching the passing of the torch, I feel like, a little bit. And obviously I'm excited to watch that fight, and that whole card. I like Aaron Pico. I like Johnny Eblen. I'm actually really excited to watch Johnny Eblen fight. They have some good fights on that card, but like you said, doesn't amount to what UFC 300 is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not dumping on that card because I think it's a fun card. I was just saying when I hear people dumping on UFC 300 with
Right.
the
Just
stuff they have
comparing.
on that card, and then they're saying on the same in the same breath that they're really excited and they love that that Bellator card or some other UFC card. I'm like, wait, what am I missing here? Right?
Yeah. So in covering combat sports, what has been your greatest obstacle?
Oh man. I don't know that I would say I've had any obstacle, right? I mean, access to fighters is always important, right? If you want to get the complete story and access to, but I've been fortunate, I've always had access, whether it was Bob Arum or Don King or Dana White or Scott Coker, whoever we're talking to as promoters. And then, as the fighters have always been generous to me with their time. And, I always try to be cognizant of that. And, a lot of times you'll see my interviews with fighters and I try to be to the point and I don't want to bullshit with them. And because, I know that they're giving me their precious time away from their families and their free time and other things that they can do. So I want to get right to the point, do the interview, and then let them go back to what they're doing. And I think, access in this sport is so important. You can do it from afar and you can sit there, but you don't really have the insight that you have when you're close to them and you get to talk to them in person and you get to talk to them, one-on-one and have that, you get those moments where now I understand what makes this guy tick or what makes that gal tick. And I understand things about them that I didn't before when I talked to them, and you get the proper context. And so, I think that, there hasn't really been any obstacles for me. I've been fortunate in that regard. I was at the Las Vegas Review Journal for 17 years before I went to Yahoo. And it's been a blessed path for me. I mean, when I grew up, I the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to play quarterback for the Steelers. And there was only one problem. There was only one problem I had with that. I sucked as an athlete, right? So I couldn't play. But I used to lay in bed when I was a kid and like say listen to the Pirate game on the radio. And I would listen to the game at night. I would wake up the next morning and I would lay in bed and I would announce my own game. And I was the star of my own game, right? And I hit the game-winning home run or struck out the guy with the bases loaded to save the game. But I always was interested in being in sports journalism. And so to be able to do this now in sports that I love so much and that have meant so much to me, I'm great. I couldn't be more grateful for that.
And that's awesome. And, one of the final things I want to talk to you about is, if you could talk to us a little bit about KevinIoli.com. Like I said, I went on the website and I had seen, that's where I kind of was able to read a little bit about you, get a little bit more of an insight on who you were as an individual. But yeah, explain to people about KevinIoli.com.
Well, I started that January 22nd. And it came really in the days immediately after I got laid off. So I got laid off on December 1st from Yahoo. Didn't quite make it to 17 years, almost to 17 years, but didn't quite make it there. So I thought, what is next for me? Really, what do I want to do? And I mentioned on Twitter that I had gotten laid off in this outpouring of support that I got, I never imagined I was going to get, right? It was just amazing. And, and I was offered jobs and people offered to help me. And it was really amazing. And I've been a critic of social media and, there's a lot of bad things about it. There are also a lot of good things about it. And the compassion that people showed and the care and concern and the love they showed for me in the immediate aftermath of me losing my job really heartened me. And so I was trying to decide, do I want to work for somebody else or do I want to work for myself? And if I work for myself, do I want to do something like Substack, where I'm working for a site that somebody else owns? I can do my own thing. Or do I want to completely? And so I said, I want to control the experience from A to Z, right? So if you go to KevinIoli.com, that is my vision of what I want combat sports to be. I want it to be better than it is today, but I'm happy. We have apps coming out soon. that for iOS and Android that you'll be able to download that'll scale really nicely. But my website now, I feel like scales nicely on mobile. It looks great on desktop. I've got everything out there, that I want the way I want it. Right. And I'm going to, as time goes by, make changes. The one criticism I've gotten as I've done it, I've gotten overwhelming praise, I would say. But the one negative, people don't like the fact that I'm covering the slapping. And that, slapping, I'm warming up to, right. I'm still, when it first happened, and I was still at Yahoo at the time. They had a test run that they only invited some local, Las Vegas media to. I went to that and I left halfway through, and I'm like, this isn't for me. But as I learned more about it, and I talked to doctors, and I thought, okay, and it's popular. It's popular among a segment of the audience that I want to have come to my site, right? Young people who are, 18 to 34 years old, or maybe even just 18 to 29, that group of people is really passionate about that. And that's a group that I want to, reach for my boxing coverage and my MMA coverage, right? And so I decided to try to cover that. But, I'm not covering that on a daily basis. When they have an event, I'll cover it. But on an ongoing concern, I'm also covering bare knuckle fighting, right? But it's the same thing. There's a hardcore following for it. I don't know if it translates to the wider audience, but my main thing is going to be boxing and MMA on a day-to-day basis, and I want to try to do a little bit of everything, right? And I want my site to be my vision of what I want combat sports to be, and I hope people give it a shot. It's free. If you want to go to the site, if you want to comment, the only thing you have to register like that. I just want to have that. I'm not sending you emails. I'm not getting your information and selling it to some third party. All I want to do is be able to control the spam that's in there, right? And right. So that's the reason. So and if somebody gets off topic, we can shut them down a little easier if we know who they are, right? But otherwise, I don't care what your opinion. Somebody could go on there and they can say I suck and I'm terrible, and I don't care about that. They can have whatever opinion they want. I just don't want them attacking other people, and I don't want them going off topic. Other than that, have at it, say what you want to say. And so I feel like the site is really my expression of what I want to see in a combat sports site.
Yeah, no, and I looked through the site. I actually really, I enjoyed briefly looked through it, and I'll go back looking through it, and I most definitely will register. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a very nice site. Everything was easy to find. I feel like that's a big when you create a website, not making everything like, oh, where's this at? Everything is right there. And even covering the power slap, you have to go with the, what's popular right now. And people are loving it now. It's a crazy sport, in my personal opinion. I would never do it. I'd rather put on 4-ounce gloves than to just stand there and let someone slap me. But you gotta go with what's popular.
What is the sport in this, right? Like that was the first thing I said when I first saw it, and I still feel that way to a certain degree. But after I talked to the athletes and after I talked to doctors, right? So there was a couple things. The thing that first put me over is I talked to 6 different doctors. And in any combat sport, you're not going to have doctors say, oh, I endorse boxing, or I endorse, a sport where you're getting kicked in the head and punched in the head and kneed in the head and elbowed in the head. Like doctors, that's not a thing that doctors are looking to do. But, we've gotten to a safety point in boxing and MMA where for the most part, we have our moments, but for the most part, we can keep it as safe as possible for the athletes. So slapping, I was like, it's undefended. But then, like Austin Turpin, who's one of their top fighters, he said to me, he goes, well, I don't get slapped in practice. The only time I ever get slapped is in a fight. And most of the fights are 3 rounds. The title fight's 5 rounds. So the most slaps I can take is 5. I'm not getting hit in sparring. I'm not getting hit any other time but that. And I'm not getting hit with a closed fist. I'm getting hit with the palm of a hand. And so that resonated with me. And then he had a funny line. He said, and I also played nose tackle when I was playing high school football. And the star on the other team was Derrick Henry, who's now at the Tennessee Titans. And he said, Derrick Henry ran over me so many times, I can't even tell you. And I never was hurt as much as I was when Derrick Henry ran over me. So as I listened to that, I thought, okay, it's not, it looks really, really, really bad. But it's not as bad as maybe the perception would create it to be. And the fighters are are safe, relatively speaking, right? I mean, nobody's ever safe in a even in football, right? You get hit to the head, we don't know what could happen. So that was kind of my journey to saying, I'm going to write about these people.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, very interesting sport. And a lot of those guys, they do obviously mixed martial arts, things like that on the side. So, hey, but more power to them. Again, not something that I would ever want to do, but hey,
or me,
right, by all means. And so, one of the final topics, obviously, UFC Mexico City is this weekend. We have Brandon Moreno versus Brandon Royval. This is the second time they're fighting, and obviously, there's a lot of other good cards in that fight. But talking about this one, what do you think? How do you think that goes? Because obviously, the division's interesting. Pantoja's the champion, right? And it's kind of like it's just a cycle. These guys are just constantly fighting and just going around the same drain and just fighting each other multiple times. How do you think this fight, plays out? Because if Moreno wins, that's Pantoja Moreno 3, and if Royval wins, that's Pantoja Royval 3. So, how do you think, and what do you think the UFC will do, for new, fresh blood when it comes to the featherweight or the bantamweight division?
Flyweights, yeah.
Flyweight division.
I think if you look, they have a lot of really good flyweights. Like the flyweight division is just amazing right now. Up and coming guys, and Amir Alzabi was supposed to be the one fighting Moreno in this fight. He got injured and had to pull out of that bout. But I think, Moreno is a star. There's no doubt about that. So if Moreno wins, they're going to go with Moreno versus Pantoja because Moreno is a big star and he will attract an audience, right? There's no question about that. If Royval wins, I don't think I've heard Dana say that he's going to get a title shot, and he might. I think it's going to depend on how he looks and other factors, right? But Royval is not guaranteed to get a title shot. Although a win over Brandon Moreno is an impressive win in the UFC, and that will help your cause, but it's not a guarantee that he gets that title fight. So as I look at it, I just kind of feel like this is a really good, fun fight that's going to bring people out of their seat, as will Brian Ortega and Yair Rodriguez. And